Hi, my name is Sarah Edmondson, and I'm going to deliver a short talk about Jacob Epstein's bronze bust of Lady Augusta Gregory from 1910. This talk was scheduled as part of the Coffee Conversation series at the Hugh Lane Gallery. However, due to the current coronavirus outbreak, I'm now delivering this talk remotely. Nonetheless, I'm going to try to keep it as conversational as possible, and I hope that you have a nice cup of coffee to enjoy for the duration. I'm going to begin by introducing you to the artist, Jacob Epstein, who was born in New York in 1880 to Russian-Polish parents. He is often referred to as a British sculptor because he became a British subject in 1907, according to the Tate. He was the third son of 5 children and would have come from a relatively middle-class background. He studied drawing and began his artistic career as an illustrator. So in 1902, he received quite a large commission to illustrate The Spirit of the Ghetto by Hutchins Hapgood, a book about life on the Lower East Side of New York. So you can see here one of his illustrations using black crayon or Conte, and he very confidently creates different tones and uses a very dark line to outline the figure. This commission enabled him to travel to Paris, where he studied at the École des Beaux-Arts and the Académie Julian. When he was in Paris, he would have, of course, visited the Louvre and studied the antique and so-called primitive sculpture there. Like many modern artists, such as Picasso, Brancusi, and Modigliani, whom he later met in Paris in 1912, he was drawn to the art forms from India, West Africa, and the Pacific Islands. In 1905, he settled in London, and it was there that he met Lady Gregory in 1910. Epstein was married twice. His second wife, Kathleen Garman, was one of the famous Garman sisters. So you can see her here seated next to him. Their daughter, actually, Kitty Garman, became the first wife of Lucian Freud. So you can see here in this photograph that he was mixing in very bohemian circles. He was a very prolific artist with a huge output. So he produced many large-scale public sculptures as well as the small bronze busts, such as the one of Lady Gregory. So his art is displayed all over the world and was highly original for its time. He championed many of the concepts central to modernist sculpture, such as truth to material, direct carving, and taking inspiration from non-Western art traditions. He influenced many younger generations, such as Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth. However, as much as he was popular with his peers, some of his works were frowned upon by the more conservative members of society, who often considered his sculptures too sexually explicit and vulgar. So I've chosen a selection, just a small selection of 3 of his larger sculptures, just to give you a little bit of an insight into his work. So this is his sculpture Lazarus, which is carved from Hopton wood stone, and it can be viewed in the Chapel of New College in Oxford. Hopton wood is a time-hardened stone that Epstein carved with blunt chisels and wooden rasps. So Lazarus is a character from the Bible, who was raised from the dead by Jesus 4 days after being entombed. So the sculptor David McFall gives an account of the difficult process of carving this stone and how Epstein battled with the proportions to create this disturbing but ambitious sculpture, one capable of inducing nightmares in the viewer, an embodiment of torture and grief signified by the exasperated twisting of the neck and head. So you can see that it is very large in scale. You can see here Epstein standing next to the sculpture in his studio. So there is beautiful documentation of his work online. often in these black and white photographs that have a very kind of a German expressionist or film noir feel to them. So I think this is an amazing example of his carving work and the very bold forms that he created with a chisel. You can obviously see the kind of the bandages wrapped around the figure of Lazarus. The second work I'm just going to briefly discuss is Madonna and Child. So this is a monumental work for which the artist drew inspiration from Byzantine depictions of the Virgin Mary. In his preparatory studies, he gave Mary the features of his wife Kathleen, but in the final piece he abandoned this idea, perhaps due to complaints from the public. Now owned by the King's Fund, the Dean's Mews buildings were formerly occupied by the Convent of the Holy Child of Jesus, which was bombed in the Second World War. The convent commissioned the architect Louis Osman to restore the damaged buildings and also to create the linking bridge across the Mews. It was his idea to include a statue of the Madonna and Child levitating against the bridge's facade. The statue was to be cast from roofing lead acquired from the bombed building. Osman independently commissioned Jacob Epstein to design the cast for the statue, which caused a further artistic controversy. This was due to people questioning whether it was appropriate for a Jew to create a Christian image, and there were also requested alterations to the statue's face. So the statue was formally unveiled on the 14th of May in 1953. So yeah, he created quite a controversy. You know, people didn't always approve of his work. So this sculpture exists on the arch between two buildings. So you observe it from low down, looking up. But I just think the colors of the work are really beautiful. And then when I found out that it was made from gathering the scrap metal after the bombing. So you can see the beautiful blues and mustards on the shoulder of Mary. Perhaps you can see in the face of Jesus his interest in more primitive art forms by the exaggerated facial features. So I've just included a quote from the late Mark Fisher. So he said, "I worked in Cavendish Square in the 1960s and got to admire that Epstein. Not his best, nor as good as his work on the outside of the offices above St. James's Underground station, but well worth preserving." So with that, I felt that the next work that I should show would probably be his sculptures from above St. James's Underground station. So just in case some of you are not familiar with Mark Fisher, he is an art critic and cultural theorist who has written some very significant and important texts about the 21st century. He is sometimes referred to as K-punk due to his blog. So these are the works that Mark Fisher was referring to. Night and Day. So Epstein's colossal Night and Day statues are on 55 Broadway building over St. James's Station. So Epstein commented that he always turned to Egypt for inspiration for architectural or monumental sculpture, and the influence of Egypt and other cultures is clear in these abstract figures. However, many people publicly spoke out against these statues and protested in order to have them removed. The classical archaeologist, Percy Gardner, felt the sculptures lacked morality, and there was consternation about the length of the boy's penis on the sculptured day. So with that in mind, Epstein actually decided to shorten it by an inch. So you can just see there that he he was kind of a bit of a Marmite, you know, that many people really loved and were in favor of his work, whereas maybe just some more conservative members of society were offended by his sculptures. So this is just another example of one of Epstein's bronze busts. He produced many portraits of very important figures throughout his career, which probably provided him with a pretty stable income. So this is his portrait of Albert Einstein, who he met in 1933 while Albert Einstein was in a refugee camp having just fled Nazi Germany. So he was very taken by Einstein, in particular his hair. But he wrote that his glance contained a mixture of the humane, the humorous, and the profound. This was a combination that delighted me. He resembled the aging Rembrandt. So I've included here a photograph of Einstein and Epstein, just to show you his working methods. So he would create the portrait initially in clay. So you can see how he uses the clay. He has a very expressive and vigorous way of working. So he leaves visible all of his fingerprints, and you can see very clearly where he's added and subtracted the clay and how he's pressed the clay to create the form of the face and to create the illusion of texture. So even if you look at the bronze head of Einstein, if you look at his nose and his cheeks, you can see the movement and how Epstein has pressed the clay, moving from the nose outward to the cheek, then down the jaw, onto the neck, and across onto the collarbone. So you can almost see, it's still visible, the direction that he's pushed the clay. Even then on the forehead of Einstein, you can see how the artist has added clay in order to create the frown lines and to give Einstein some expression. And then obviously how he's added clay and created the texture of his very kind of infamous hair. Epstein was not, however, as taken by Lady Gregory. So he didn't have the same kind of immediate connection with her. So according to Owen Martin, in an essay on the Liverpool University Press, in a 1940 memoir, he described Lady Gregory as a vain Englishwoman who only cared for her appearance. So he felt that their interaction was awkward, and this was mainly due to their difference in social class. However, contrary to this, George Bernard Shaw described Lady Gregory as the greatest living Irish woman. So there's two very different accounts. So in her defense, she really did contribute a huge amount to the development of the arts in Ireland through her writing and acting, and her commitment to the Irish literary revival. She also co-founded the Abbey Theatre alongside W.B. Yeats. So she was born into a class that identified closely with British rule, which she later turned against. Her conversion to cultural nationalism became evident in her writings, and her home at Coole Park, which has sadly since been destroyed, was an infamous meeting place for leading revival figures. So you can see here, I've just included a black and white photograph of Lady Gregory alongside Epstein's portrait of her. So you can see that there is, he has captured a likeness. But I also think he's done much more than just capture her physical features. I think he was really a skilled artist in his ability to capture the essence of a person. He paid very close attention to texture and the subtleties of form. So you can see even, you know, how he's created that kind of small bump on the bottom of her nose, and how he was able to create the wiriness of her grey hair and the different strands as they're pulled back into her bun. And there's also a softness to her face and to the skin. So as much as I greatly admire it, Lady Gregory was not as pleased. So this portrait was commissioned by her nephew, Sir Hugh Lane, in 1910. And it is believed that neither she nor he was very pleased with the result. They considered her pose and demeanour too forthright. However, Lady Gregory subsequently came to appreciate the work's energy and expressive qualities. So I've just included here an image of Lady Gregory's estate in Coole Park. So below is a photograph of Lady Gregory with W.B. Yeats. W.B. Yeats wrote numerous poems inspired by his time at Coole Park. And then there is an image of the famous autograph tree that is in the grounds of Coole Park, or the former grounds of Coole Park. So you can see carved into the bark the initials of a number of very important Irish literary figures. So you can see the initials of Synge, Jack and William Yeats, George Moore, Sean O'Casey, George Bernard Shaw, Catherine Tynan, Violet Martin, and of course Lady Gregory herself. So before I end, I would just like to commend and thank Lady Gregory for her fight to ensure that her nephew's great collection of modern and impressionist paintings could be returned to Ireland and enjoyed by the public. If you haven't managed to see the current exhibition at the Hugh Lane, the Lane Legacy, then you can view images of the exhibition online. The colours on the walls are truly exceptional and really give the paintings a whole new lease of life. So if you require any further information, there are details about the Hugh Lane's gallery programme on the website, so you can find them at www.hughLane.ie/education. So thank you for listening and stay safe.